I remember how they went, but I think maybe my recollection of those things might be different than yours. So some of the things we'll go over. I just kind of wanted to get some reminiscing from you about, you know, what I was like when I grew up, for better or for worse.
For better or for worse.
So I have some, I guess my earliest fleeting memories was when we lived in in Omaha, um, and I have a vague recollection of we lived upstairs from an old man at one point when I was
first moved to Omaha.
when I was very young, and I remember that he was very frugal, and he used to, and he had like 3 or 4 different coverings that he put on a new couch one time. I don't remember the fact that he did that so much as the fact that I remember you talking about him doing that. I also remember going to, I believe, a Safeway store where we do our groceries.
Right across the street from where we lived there. But we lived upstairs, and you had your Lincoln logs, but you couldn't play with them unless they were on a rug, because the lady that lived downstairs in the other apartment, if you rattled them on the floor, she'd get mad. So you'd always dump them out on the rug and play with them and then put them back. The old man lived next door, and
Was he the landlord?
yeah, and he had this brand new couch, and then he wanted to keep it clean, so he put a couch cover over it. And he didn't want to ruin that couch cover, so he put a plastic couch cover over top of that. And the plastic was too hot to sit on, so he put another couch cover over that. So it wouldn't make him sweat.
Why don't you tell me about when I was actually born? You know, circumstances surrounding that. I mean, some kids, of course, were born by accident, others by design. Was I a wanted child or not in the beginning?
After you got here?
What about before I got here?
Well, it was an accident, let's put it that way, before you got here, but it wasn't anything we planned to do right away. But my mother says, after we got married, she says, well, when I told her I was pregnant, she says, well, I figured that'd happen as soon as you got married. So, first thing happened. But I didn't want any boys. I'd never been around any boys. I always wanted girls. And when I got a boy, I gave him away to my mother. While I was still under the anesthetic. She come in, she says, oh, you've got the nicest looking little football player. I said, I don't want him. You can have him. So you were given away.
So was it hard for her to get used to that little boy then?
Oh, yes.
And apparently that little boy was quite ornery when he was little.
Mm-hmm.
How much of it do you think was me? How much of it do you think was me being ornery, more so than the next kid? And how much of it, now that you've had other children, how much of it was that you just really didn't know much about being a parent, and it took you a while to develop a style about that?
You weren't that ornery. We just expected you to be perfect, was all. And you weren't ornery or mean or anything like that. It was just that you were investigative and always trying to find out how things worked and how things did this or did that, and just like breaking the eggs to see if you could find the chickens and things like that. you'd watch something on television and you had to find out for yourself if that's the way it was. But you weren't a mean kid or anything. You just investigative and
I remember being in the grocery store in Omaha and being in the cart, and while we were shopping, and I was playing with the watermelons in the produce aisle, and they all rolled down and several of them broke on the floor. And I don't remember a whole lot about that. Do you remember that at all?
no, I don't remember that.
I remember being, when we lived upstairs in a different house, we lived upstairs, um, and the landlords lived downstairs. They had some kids that I didn't get along with very well. These kids they locked me in the garage at one point. Um, I used to take the
Took
rap.
your fist and you busted the window out to get out. You had to break the window to get out of the garage, and then they made us pay for the window after their kids had locked you in. They wanted us to pay for the window, and I told them their kid locked you in, they could pay for it. That was the ones that you stood out in the yard hollering, "You dumb bastard, you dumb bastard." And I said, "Do you know what that word means?" "Well, I think it means a spoiled child." And you were about 3 then, I think.
Do you have any other recollections of when we lived in that upstairs house?
That's where Dad had his teeth all pulled out. Yeah, because he had such bad pyorrhea. Mom come up there and he'd had toothaches all the time. So she peeled out the money out of her little cash and handed it to him and told him to go get his teeth pulled.
What, his mom or your mom?
My mom. She always kept her little pocket purse pinned inside of her bra, and she pulled that out and took out $300 and handed it to him. And she says, "Now go get your dentures." So he had his teeth all pulled out. And the dentist told him that if he hadn't had it done when he did, he'd have probably been dead in 3 months. Because he had so much pyorrhea in his mouth and poison in his system at that time. So.
Did he know that he had?
No, he didn't know. He just knew he had toothaches and every tooth in his head was so bad. So, and that's where Kathy was about a year old, and Alice came up there one time. And I think one of her kids had measles, and gave them to Kathy, and she got the measles when we were up there. Lived up there. Then you got them.
And I remember I had a lot of problems with wetting the bed when I was little.
Yeah, after that you did. You didn't up until that time. But after that you had the measles and you had a high fever, and they said that that's what caused them, that it caused the control valve to weaken. And you always had problems with that afterwards. And you were, probably about 3 or 4 maybe. About 3, I guess. When we took you in for tests and check up at the Creighton Clinic there, and they gave you a patch test and it turned positive. Scared the heck out of me because I thought you had TB. They x-rayed your chest and they said that you had the possibility of having tuberculosis, or else you have had it one time or other and gotten over it. And so you had to go in and have another x-ray every 6 months for about 2-3 years. I don't know if you ever do any more or not, do you? When you got older, you had a patch test, and you told them, I know it's going to turn, it's positive. When they went to read it, no doctor says, you don't know anything. You're not the doctor here. I'm the doctor.
Which doctor was that?
Oh, that was that children's doctor. I can't remember what his name was now.
Schofield?
No. Started with a B. But anyway, he was going to tell you what it was, and he looked at it and he says, well, it's positive. You told him, well, you knew it was going to be because you'd had him ever since you were a little kid that was positive. He was the one that I took Gail to that had, she had sore throat and earache and all. And he told me to get her down there right now because she probably had mastoiditis and get her in there. And he got her in there, and then he decided it was just ear infection. Wasn't any mastoid after all. He was diagnosing her over the telephone. Had me bring her in about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night to check it out. Can't think of his name now.
Was he the guy that lived on 7th Street? Was on 7th?
No, that was DeMay.
Yeah.
Now this was, for a long time, he was the only children's specialist in town. But he's retired now. I think his son's a doctor too, but I think he's still around.
Well, there's certain stories about my upbringing and what I did as a child that I certainly remember. I guess I'm kind of asking you to jog my memory about some things that I may not remember about myself. You know, good or bad. You know, what kinds of things do you recall about when I was 2 or 3? You know, when during that first year of life. You know, tell me.
I don't
Tell
remember.
me about what happened.
I know when you were just learning to walk. You used to go around with your tongue between your teeth all the time, and you'd climb up and down the stairs. We'd always tell you if you didn't take your tongue and put it in your mouth and quit putting it between your teeth, you were going to bite it off. And one day you slipped and going up the steps and bumped your chin and you almost did bite it off, but clear through. You didn't do that anymore. When you had your bottle, we used to.
In tears, when she would come down and hug and kiss him. Said she didn't hug and kiss him.
Shame on you.
So both of them are feeling.
Well, you talk to Mom. You keep talking.
I can't talk. I'll take you down to the store, down to Skagway's or someplace. Walk along the aisles in the toy department, and if you'd point at something she bought it. But when you were little, she couldn't stand it if a baby threw up on her. And she had this beautiful royal blue dress, and she was working, buying her own clothes then. Of course, I couldn't afford all the pretty clothes she had then. And you threw up on the shoulder of that dress. She'd never wear it again. It was cleaned and everything, but she'd never wear it again, so she gave it to me. But she used to buy you anything. And then she bought all these glass baby bottles. And when you got a little over a year old or so, you'd take them by the nipple and you'd swing them around like this and then let go of them. They'd go flying off and break. And we replaced them several times, but you'd do it again. So we told you this one time, you break this one, that was it. You'd never get another one. That was the end of it. You'd have to do without. And so we were sitting in the car, and you were leaning out the window. We were talking to somebody, and while we were sitting there, you took that last bottle, and you twirled it around this way, and whammo! So it busted. So we went home. Dad told you couldn't have another bottle.
How old was I?
Oh, you must have been a little over a year old. And you bawled and you squalled and you carried on that night. You wouldn't go to sleep. And we lived in this little trailer house.
Could I talk very well at that point?
Oh.
Could I talk enough to understand
Oh, yeah.
what was going on?
Yeah, you could. You talked pretty early where you could understand, But we lived in this little trailer. It was about the size of our camper out there. And it was... Dad had taken everything out of it, and we had a couch in there, and your baby bed that was just one of those little bitty baby beds, the side out of it. And you bawled that night. You would not go to sleep. And so Dad got up, and he took the cap of the bottle. It was a screw-on type cap, and he tried to fit it on every jar that we had in the house. And he finally found a honey jar that fit on. And that was your bottle for a long time. You didn't throw that one for a long time after that. And that was your last bottle. When you finally got rid of that one, why, that was it. But that one bounced pretty good. It was heavier glass or something.
Did I ever have a favorite blanket or toy or thing that I wanted to sleep with or was attached to like that?
No, I don't think so.
They call it transitional objects. But
Yeah.
did I ever have any of that kind of thing?
I don't think so. I don't think Kathy did either. And as far as I can remember, Bev or Doris didn't either. Karen was the only one that had a baby blanket that she had to have. Well, Doris did. I guess any kind of a blanket she had to have that had fuzz on it that she could pick. But I don't think you ever did. I can't remember anything anyway that you had. But you could talk the ear off in a person. And the biggest old words you'd use,
Benji, Mommy, be right there.
you could tell people what the name of the moss was on the north side of the trees. And I never can remember what it was now, but you'd listen to things on TV after we moved to Omaha. And when we moved out to California, you'd watch these science programs. You were about 4. And you'd sit there just mesmerized in front of the TV, learn all about these science projects. And then we'd go over to Ralph's and you'd have to tell him all about them. He could never get over how you could remember all that stuff that was on that program and how it was all run. Ben reminds me a lot of you. I remember you used to go with me down to the basement when we lived in Omaha there, in that big house with the furnace down the basement. I hated to go down in that back porch and down in there all by myself, so you'd always go with me and we'd have to stoke the furnace. And you were only about 3.5, 4. He was about 4 then, because when we moved to California, that was just before that. You just turned 4 when we went to California. No.
We were talking about moving to California, and the one thing I remember that was just traumatic about the time that I spent in California was one afternoon I was playing in the backyard, and I was pulling up huge clumps of weeds with by the roots and with the clods and so forth, and I'd throw them way up in the air and let them fall down like parachute men and crash in the yard or whatever. Well, I picked up one clump of weeds, and for whatever reason, the thing went haywire and it landed over on top of the house. No big deal really, except I worried about that for 3 days. I remember sitting in the tree. There's an apricot tree in the backyard, and I remember worrying about how that was going to ruin the shingles, or it would somehow fall through the roof of the house, or the roof of the house would need to be replaced because of this or that or the other thing. And I was just catastrophizing. I just felt awful about this, and I went around for days worrying about this. and and then finally there was a rainstorm, and it ended up washing this off of the roof of the house. And so then I was okay after that. But that's really one of my most traumatic memories of there. I remember running into the bathroom because I had to go so bad, holding my penis already out of my pants and peeing in Kathy's face. I remember that. I don't know if she remembers that.
I don't know. She's never mentioned it. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think you were aware of that.
Probably.
Aware enough to punish me at the time. I remember playing over in the Los Angeles riverbed, even though you didn't want me to. I remembered that there was a board fence next to our house, and there was like a hole underneath the fence that I could crawl under and go play with these kids that were kind of the neighborhood ruffians that would always go around and do stuff that you didn't want me to be involved in. And I would crawl under the fence and play with them when I wasn't supposed to. I remember going into a neighbor lady's garden and using a piece of pipe off of an old swing set and killing all the snails and slugs in her garden and whapping to death all of her plants in the process. I remember
Probably that little old Jewish lady, was it?
I can't remember her, but I remember that we had a bread man who would come deliver bread to us, and he had a hole in the cleft of his chin, literally poked in the cleft of his chin that was hollow inside. I could see the light reflect. It was weird. And I remember monarch butterflies. I remember lots of apricots from the apricot tree.
Oh, weren't they big?
And I remember sometimes we would take clay from the riverbed,
Yeah.
and we would make ceramic things and dry them out in the oven and make ashtrays and things like that. Sir, what kind of things do you remember from that time?
Oh, you remember walking or going downtown in Los Angeles and watching all the dances from the Miss Universe contest? They had all these down in the main part of Los Angeles, clear down by the Pike. They had this one street blocked off, and it was separated into the 48 states areas, and each state had their own dance, and I don't know, was it Miss Universe? It was different countries, I guess it was, and each country had their own dance and their own program set up. And we went down there and watched all that one afternoon, and then we walked back home. It was about 48 blocks up the I wished I could do it now, up the Long Beach Boulevard to go home. And Dad worked about halfway up there, and we'd walk, well, it was a little over halfway.
Was that when you worked at the filling station?
Yeah, Wilshire service station. And we'd walk up there just about and get there about the time he was getting off and ride on home with him there. But we'd go down, we'd ride on that big double Ferris wheel. You'd love to go on that. And after we rode on it a few times, we found out that there'd been several people killed on it. Remember going down to this man's house. It was along the ocean. He had a oceanfront house there. And I don't know where we met him or who he was or anything. I think it was somebody Dad knew him from work.
Abalone shells.
Yeah. And yeah, he had a lot of those. And he had been in the movies at one time. And he showed us some of the keepsakes from his movie days and things that he'd been in the movies. But I can't remember who he was or where we met him or what it was all about, but I can remember going down there. I can remember how we used to drive over to Ralph's, and you got your collarbone broke there, yeah. You fell on your hand or something. I don't remember how that even happened.
I remember the collarbone story. I think that was one afternoon. There were a bunch of honeybees that were swarming around this flowering bush that was at the house right next door. And I was like out there, and I'd kick that bush, and those honeybees, they'd swarm up all over the place, and then they'd land back down on the bush, and and then I'd kick it again, and those bees, they'd swarm all over the thing. And about that time, this kid that was a couple, 3 years older than me, as I recall, who lived next door, who was kind of a bully, he come out of the back door of his house and around the side of the house, and he says, don't you tease my pet. Those are my pet bees, and I'm their master, and they'll do what I want them to do. Don't you play with my bees, you know. And he started, chasing after me and running after me, and he was going to like wail on me and beat me up. And I remember that he kind of tackled me in the front yard, and then jumped on top of me. It was when I fell down, when he tackled me, that it broke my collarbone. But I remember him sitting on top of me, and he was looking over his shoulder and waving his arm towards these bees, saying, "Come bees, sting bees, sting bees, sting." You know. And I do remember wearing a brace for that, for my collarbone there for a while after that.
Yeah, you had a bump on it right there on your collarbone. They didn't really set it or anything or do anything to it. They just had to keep it immobile, I guess, and there was a bump on your collarbone where it was broken there. Remember putting you in the nursery school? When we lived up there on Plymouth Boulevard, I walked over to Long Beach Boulevard one day, and there was this sign in the window that they wanted help in the notions department there. And it was a dime store. And so I decided I'd go in and see if I could get the job. And he says, well, he says, all we're doing right now is just taking applications and giving the test, and then we'll decide who we want to hire. He said, would you like to take the test now? And I said, yeah, I'd take the test. And it was all math. It was yard goods and pricing and how many yards would you, or how much would it cost for, say, 5 yards of ribbon at 23 cents a yard, or how much would it cost for 5 feet of ribbon at 23 cents a yard, and stuff like that, you know. And I took the test, and it took me about 20-30 minutes to take it, and I handed it to him, and he says, well, he says, are you sure you're done with it? And I said, yeah. He said, well, don't you want to look it over? I said, well, I can if you want me to. And I looked it over, and I handed it back to him. I said, it's all right with me. He looked at it and checked it all down, and he says, when can you start to work? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I got to figure out where to put my kids first. But I said, if I can get them into a nursery school, I can start anytime. Well, he wanted me to start the following Monday morning. And so I tried to get you and Kathy into a nursery school and find a babysitter. Well, I had you all lined up to go to the nursery school. But the first day, you had to just go in, and I had to stay with you. And the second day, why, the same thing. And then the third day, why, someone had to pick you up at noon. And it was just a slow, and they wouldn't change their rules. Everybody had to do it the same. And I didn't know anybody, or couldn't get anybody to come and get you, to pick you up, and I couldn't make any arrangements for it, so I couldn't take the job. But about a couple months later, the guy walked up to the house and wanted me to come and get the job then, after that even, but I didn't have anybody. I think that by that time we were getting ready to come back here. So. But I almost worked there. But I don't remember too many. I don't know, we used to go downtown a lot down there. Remember the green pistachio ice cream cones we used to get down there? Great big double deckers. 20, 25 cents a piece. Get one like that now, it'd cost you over $1.
As I recall, about the same time that we were going after the ice cream cones when we'd go downtown, out there, I was out in California. At one point, you bought me a wooden clarinet, when we were downtown. And as I recall, it was on the way home. I was like playing that clarinet as I was walking down the street, and we had to walk under one of these wooden canopies that they build because there's construction next door. And so we were walking underneath of that thing, and I remember playing with this wooden clarinet, and I had it in my mouth, and I walked right into one of these pillars that they had supporting that canopy, and of course racked up my mouth, which hurt. Kind of inconsequential, I guess, but I remember hurting my mouth on that wooden clarinet.
I don't remember that. I don't remember the wooden clarinet. When we moved back here, I know we registered you for school and you were already signed up for school and everything. Huh? No. Ben wanted a sandwich this afternoon, and I fixed him a sandwich and had butter on it, and then he decided he wanted peanut butter, and signed up for school and everything. And you were supposed to start to school, I think, about a week after, another week or so later, and we decided we were coming back home. And we just packed up and left everything. Dad had he was assistant manager of the station, and if he'd stuck with it, they promised him a managership. But he decided he wanted to go home, and I wanted to go home, and so we packed everything up. We'd come back home.
What made you decide to come home?
Homesick, tired of Dad come home from work in the night. He says, I can't stand it here anymore. He said, let's go back to Nebraska. I says, if we go back, we stay there then, right? Yep, we'll stay there. So we came back here, and he couldn't get a job right away. And so I started working at Hested's. And he started working for Frank, for helping him trim trees when he could get Frank out of bed.
Yeah, talk about that situation a little bit.
That was he was worthless. He promised Dad half of everything that he got.
Explain who Frank was.
Frank Hoover, Marble's ex-husband. He was a tree trimmer, and he was good, but he couldn't get his butt in gear long enough to get out and get on the job. But he had this cemetery to trim up before Memorial Day, and him and Dad were working on it together, and he promised Dad half of what he made on it for working on it. And Dad would get up every morning, and maybe if Frank got around to it by noon, they might get started, but they finally did get the job all done. And I was walking home one day from work, and Frank and Marble pulled up alongside of me and honked, and Marble jumped out and handed me this envelope of money. She says, it's pretty good for a month's work. And it was only about half or less of what he was supposed to have gotten. Well, I don't remember how much it was, but it was way less than what he was supposed to get. And she took off with him, but she didn't know what the promise was or what he was supposed to have gotten. She thought he was getting paid pretty good for what Frank had told her. And when I got home, I was just so mad. My mom said she'd never seen me so mad. Marble drove up here, and I slid into her, and that's the last time I think we ever really had a fight. I she broke my glasses and knocked down drag out.
I didn't remember that was the circumstances, but I remember you guys arguing at one point or another, and you were on the back porch of this house right here.
In the front room was
I remember you guys had some kind of a struggle on the back porch at one point or another. Maybe, but I remember.
Another time.
I might have, but see, I thought it had to. I thought it was sometime during the time when Frank and Marvel were in the process of moving out of here, and there were problems with them mistreating
that was-
Grandma and so forth.
That was the time that they moved out, and she was all in a huff about moving out and everything. And we were living down the basement, and they never paid a dime to Mom for when they were living here. They just took everything they had, and Mom would be down. We paid, well, at that time, $25 a month for. We'd pay. I don't know how. I don't know, $25 a week, I guess it was, and $75 a month, and we'd pay $25 each week for 3 weeks, and then the 4th week we wouldn't pay anything. And my mom would be down there every week when Dad would get paid to collect, because she had to buy groceries for Frank and Marvel. Well, you heard us say something about this, how it made us so upset that they were living off of her and we had to pay rent, and then Mom had to turn around and buy groceries for them and their kids. So you went and told Marvel about this.
Paula.
Or was it Paula? I don't know. Anyway, you told somebody about it.
Told them.
And so they got mad and they moved out. And
we moved out though before that, didn't we?
no, we moved out later, but they were moving out or something. I don't remember, but anyway, yeah, we got into it when I found out that you had told them that. Maybe we were the one that was moving. I don't remember.
As I recall, the people that moved was us, because we went to live on West 11th Avenue at that point. I can remember standing out in the in the backyard, kind of when Paula was hanging around the car, and we were kind of making parting shot conversations. You guys, the grown-ups, were, and there was a lot of strain and stress is all I can remember. And Paula was out there kind of hanging around the car just as we were driving off for the last time, and that's about all I remember of the move itself.
It could have been, but I know I can remember my mom saying, "Well, don't get mad at him for just telling the truth." You said it. Why, he told the truth. Why, he don't get mad at him for telling the truth about it.
Why do you think that your mom allowed that situation to occur, where she was being sponged off of or taken advantage of for so long, and like you say, she understood that she was being taken advantage of? Why couldn't she say no to it?
Oh, I don't know. I think it was mostly because Marvel was keeping Paula, kind of helping her with Paula, and she didn't realize what Frank was doing to Paula, and that, because he was taking advantage of her and using her, and when Mom did see what she thought might be problem, why they both denied it and told her she was seeing things. And I know, doesn't anybody's business. But it was just, I don't know. I think Mom was just starting to have problems that she just couldn't.
periodically the identical play in the identical spot in the field where Tyrone Bird came up